Just because I don't necessarily align with someone, and just because I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, or maybe just because I do agree with what they're doing, doesn't mean that my word is gospel. My word is simply my opinion, and that opinion is very much based on what I've read and what I've experienced, but it doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with your opinion or their opinion. So we're actually back in front of the computer again today, and we're actually going to be talking about a combination of a couple of big people in the industry. One of them I've spoken about before, and one is a new name to me. We're looking at LeanBeefPatty and James West. So obviously LeanBeefPatty is someone I've spoken about a few times on the channel. You know I'm a big fan of her content. Although I don't necessarily agree with everything she does, I think she's a great content creator and a good one for the platform. And Jessie is somebody I've never spoken about, but honestly, although I don't really consume a lot of kind of like entertaining fitness content, I actually do like some of Jessie's stuff. I don't watch it myself personally, but I have come across some of his videos, and I think he's doing incredible things in the industry. Again, not so much from like an educational perspective, which is fine, but more so what he's doing regarding the content, the entertainment value. He's doing something that a lot of people aren't matching, and I think that's why he's experienced such amazing growth recently, and it's bloody good to see. It's bloody good to see. They're doing LeanBeefPatty's booty workout, and if there's one thing I like doing, it's talk about workouts. If there's one thing I don't have, it's a booty. Although a few people did make a comment about my bum on the reel I posted on Instagram last week. I know you're lying to me to make me feel better. Just know that I appreciate you for doing so. So it seems like they're starting off with walking lunges. In all honesty, I actually am a big fan of the walking lunge. Is it a movement I necessarily incorporate all the time? No, but is it a movement I think certainly has a time and a place, especially when looking at quad and or glute work? Absolutely. Typically, I'd actually probably favor it for the glutes, just because obviously it's hard to do so with an elevated heel, which means the degree of knee flexion may be slightly limited. Obviously there are things you can do to work around that, obviously narrow the stance and whatnot, but regarding glute work, I think the walking lunge is a fantastic option. It's actually very similar to the Bulgarian split squat. So if you do hate the split squats as much as I do, I think the walking lunge is a fair substitute, in addition to something like a high stance unilateral leg press, which is also a fair substitute. Someone actually asked me if I prefer the split squat or the lunge. I think that both of them make me cry equally. No, that's a lie. I think the split squat probably makes me cry more, but if I had to choose one regarding effectiveness, I actually do prefer the split squat. But again, no reason behind that other than it's just my preference. And now they're kind of going to the bulk of the workout now, where we're looking at some direct glute work with less indirect muscle. So what I mean by that is when I say direct glute work, I mean movements that are solely there to target the glutes, with indirect muscles typically being muscles that are being worked as well, but not as the primary intention. So for example, the glute bridge or the hip thrust, for example, is going to be a lot of direct volume for the glutes without too much direct volume being distributed elsewhere, but maybe some indirect volume coming into it from the quads and whatnot, depending on how you're positioning your shins throughout. But the big thing with any kind of hip thrust is you want to keep your shins as vertical as possible, because again, that then reduces the emphasis being shifted onto other muscle groups. And also the big thing to remember is that the primary focal point of this movement is that top portion. So right at the top there, you see they're getting a bit of a squeeze at the top in the contracted position. That's a good time, because obviously this is a shortened position dominant movement, therefore you kind of want to milk the most out of your shortened position. Then it looks like we're actually moving on to a glute med kickback. And again, I think this is actually a really good movement. I think the glute med is a muscle of the glutes that's commonly neglected, but can be really effectively worked, just how LeanBeefPatty is doing here, where she's doing a kickback at an angle. So we're looking at, let's say, about 40 degrees or so out to the side, because again, that then works the glute med in a more favorable position, where if you were going directly back or directly to the side, you might be shifting emphasis onto other muscle groups, which is probably not what you want to do if you're looking at trying to compensate for the volume the glute med may be missing out on depending on your exercise selection. Ideally, try and keep your knee angle pretty consistent. It doesn't need to be perfectly consistent, but we want to keep it as consistent as possible to then prevent emphasis being shifted elsewhere, and to keep as much emphasis on the target musculature as possible, being the glute med. Whether you do this upright or leant forward, I think it's ultimately, to an extent, preference. I think you could have a slight lean forward as Jessie has here, but I probably wouldn't like lie down with it where you're basically parallel to the floor. I just kind of lean forward slightly where you're able to hold onto the machine effectively while still being able to actually maintain good bracing and breathing too. Because again, sometimes when you're leant forward, your lower back may start fatiguing a bit. Sometimes if you're leant forward, you may find it a bit harder to breathe through the movement, which then could present breathing as a limiting factor, which is obviously not what you want when you're trying to make the glutes a limiting factor rather than the lungs. It's so far bloody good exercises. Would I order them this way? Probably not myself. I probably would have actually started with the hip thrust myself, but I think so far I couldn't complain about these exercises. I think they're great. This is actually interesting. So we're looking at like a belt squat RDL, and to be honest, I actually kind of back it. I think ultimately how you choose to do an RDL is completely up to you, be that dumbbell, barbell, belt squats, whatever it may be. The big thing you got to figure out is what's being limited right now. Is it the hamstrings and the glutes, or is it going to be the grip or something else? With this belt squat RDL, obviously as soon as you chuck some straps on, the grip's probably not going to be as much of a limiting factor. And honestly, provided you can go through an adequate range of motion, which they can, I actually fully back this. This is not a variation I've ever seen somebody do on the YouTubes that I have explored and analysed myself, but I'm glad they're doing it because I think it's a good one. I really do. Does it work the glutes or hamstrings massively differently to the barbell or the dumbbell? Probably not. But reality is, just because it doesn't work it differently doesn't mean you can't choose it, especially if it's something that you feel is a bit more fun and exciting for you. And sometimes you just want a bit of variation, because training gets boring sometimes. Sadly, effective training is actually pretty boring, but sometimes it's nice to just spice it up a bit and have a bit of fun. Very quickly, I've got to throw out there, TFNL Community Coaching and the TFNL Growth Guide are always linked down below in the description, and the coaching is likely going to be linked down below in the comment section too. And the community coaching is essentially a follow-along program that I create for the team, and that team could either be the gym workout team or the home workout team, which you follow along for a number of weeks before we then have input and decide how we want to change it up for the next block. Could be more glute dominant, more back dominant, whatever people want to see. And it's essentially just a very affordable means of community coaching that allows you to work through a program that I've created with other members of that team if you so wish. And as always, it's likely cheaper than your Netflix subscription, and there's also a week free trial. And obviously the TFNL Growth Guide is what I deem to be a very effective fitness resource that can teach you many things, and it also includes 30 weeks of programming in there as well if you so wish. Extension, obviously this is no glute involvement here. This is very much a quad isolation movement. I actually spoke about the leg extension in a bit of detail on the video last Thursday, I believe, the leg day with Ryder. So if you haven't already, check that out. It was a good one. I liked it. See, now we're going on to what could be, also, hang on a sec. So this is actually, I want to throw out, this is a Cybex squat press. Arguably one of the best, if not the best leg presses on the market, just because of how it moves and the range of motion you can go through. It's bloody fantastic. You can see the foot positioning for all of them is relatively low. If you want to make this a bit more glute dominant, bring your feet up as high as you can bring them up comfortably. You want to minimize how much the knees are moving and maximize how much the glutes are working. So knee flexion isn't really like a big consideration here, whereas if you're looking at the quads, you want to maximize how much the knees are moving. Also, it looks like they're supersetting, shout out Max Tuning, I've followed Max since probably about 10,000 subscribers back in the day. He actually introed one of my YouTube videos back in, I want to say 2017, Body Power. If you're going to superset these two movements, I would actually favor it this way, being leg extensions first, followed by the leg press later, because again, leg extension is going to be very much shortened position, leg press is going to be more mid position, typically fatigue in the shortened range first, so it's harder to get into that range, so you kind of want to milk that range before you then go on to any other ranges. Otherwise, if you go the other way around, you may really struggle to get the most out of your leg extensions. So we'll see. Absolutely, I fully back it. I think ultimately, yes, it's going to bring the glutes to an extent, yes, it's going to work the quads as well to an extent. It's just a different alternative, and I do think isometric movements, so movements where you're working the muscles without going through a range of motion, actually do have a time and a place, and I actually do back them. Would I favor them over movements that take you through a full and adequate range of motion for muscle development? Probably not, no, but I do think they can be incorporated into your hypertrophy workouts, especially for those who may be suffering with knee problems or any kind of injuries, because again, it's a lot less joint loading, but it can also accumulate a lot of stimulation for certain muscle groups. So for example, let's say the quads in this case, without, like I said, too much loading of the joints. So I think it was a bit of fun. Again, would I say it was the best glute workout I've ever seen? No, because arguably I think the volume was quite high, a lot of exercises. I think if I was looking at like a glute specific workout, I'd probably only go like 4 or 5 movements, probably near 4. If I was doing like a full leg day with a bit of other stuff thrown in there, then I'd probably look at maybe 4 to 6 depending. But ultimately, I think the movement selection itself was actually really good. Again, for the sake of like purely emphasizing the glutes as much as possible, certain things could have been done differently, like you didn't need to do the leg extensions, the leg press could be done with a higher stance, things like that. But with the consideration of this is probably more of a leg day with glute emphasis, I think a lot of these movements actually have a fair time and place, because I think they're actually really good movements to choose. Out of all the movements that came up, I don't think there was a single one of them that I don't back as an effective movement for leg training. Again, the wall sits, the extensions, the leg press, so many things there. I think they're all really effective leg movements, and it's fantastic to see somebody push out this kind of content where they're promoting effective movements without unnecessary fluff. Like the most kind of fluff we saw here was the kind of belt squat RDL, which I don't think was fluff at all. It was a different variation of a very effective movement, which I support and back. I think it was bloody fantastic. So in all honesty, I'm bloody happy. I'm bloody impressed. I think ultimately, just because I don't necessarily align with someone, and just because I don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, or maybe just because I do agree with what they're doing, doesn't mean that my word is gospel. My word is simply my opinion, and that opinion is very much based on what I've read and what I've experienced, but it doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with your opinion or their opinion. And neither is right or wrong. I think there's this idea in the industry that, oh, you have to do this because it's right, or you can't do this because it's wrong. I don't think it's actually as black and white as that in the fitness industry. If I'm doing something that LeanBeefPatty doesn't like, and she's doing something that I don't like, both of us could probably debate our points fairly effectively. But again, who's right or wrong? I don't think it is that simple. I think it ultimately comes down to, does it work for you? Yes or no? If it does, fantastic. Could it be better? Who knows? But if you identify that this works for you better than this, then you kind of got your answer. So no, I back it. I think ultimately, regardless of what you do, and I'll always preach this, make sure whatever movement you do, you choose to do with sufficient intensity. If you could either do the best movements in the world with low intensity, or the worst movements in the world with high intensity, pretty confident in saying the worst movements in the world with high intensity are probably going to yield better results, because again, intensity is a really big driving factor of building muscle and progress. Again, arguably the biggest driving factor. I actually thought it was a really good video, and it's really great that they've done this kind of crossover and collaboration, because I think they're very entertaining names in the industry, and they're also very respected too. And I really appreciate videos like this because it's a good laugh. You get to see some good movements, and although like education and the workout itself isn't necessarily the primary emphasis of this video, we can still dissect those elements whilst also actually just enjoying their chemistry together. So good stuff. Big fan, big fan. Very quickly, we're going to crack on with the comment question of the week, and this is following on from a conversation I had about ab training. Is there a way I can train abs to hypertrophy like you talked about without the floor work? I have a sensitive lower back that makes those ab movements bothersome. Firstly, I think it's key to explore what might be the issue with the lower back and hopefully address it if possible by seeing like a physiotherapist or a relevant professional. But beyond that, I think a lot of the movements you can do, provided you have resistance, can be done standing up. So for example, like a crunch variation, you could do it with a cable crunch, for example, or if you're standing up at home and you put a band in a doorway, you could do like a banded crunch, again standing up. Essentially what you're trying to do is reduce the distance between the sternum and the pelvis against resistance, and you can do that standing provided you have the resistance to allow you to do so, and that again could be a band or a cable machine. In addition to that, you've got hanging leg raises too, or hanging knee raises if the leg raises are a bit tricky. Again, that brings the sternum to the pelvis, which also very effectively works the abdominal region through an adequate range of motion, provided you're doing it well. So yeah, definitely options. Just think cable machines, bands, and hanging variations, and you're pretty laughing. But that is it. That is the video. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my never-ending plugging of the growth guide and the TFNL community coaching. And thank you for tolerating the video.